Hi, my name is Grant Prater, and today I'll be going over the practice test for the reading section of the ACT. So whenever I did this test in the past, I would always read over the reading passage quickly and then go over the questions. So in case you don't want to hear me read, I'm going to scroll down slowly so that you get the chance to read the full passage. It will be on the left-hand side. I'm going to go ahead and scroll, and you have the chance to pause and read the passage, and then I'm going to read through it aloud. Okay? That was all the first passage on the left-hand side. So now I'm going to read it aloud. I don't remember how I came to know this story, and I don't know how I can possibly still remember it. On August 2nd, the day I was born, my Baba, father, stood at the nurse's station of St. Elizabeth's Medical Center of Boston with a pen between his fingers and filled out my birth certificate. He had raced down the stairs seconds after my birth, as soon as the doctor had assured him that I was all right. While filling out my certificate, Baba realized that he didn't know my sex for sure, but that didn't matter. He'd always known I was a boy, had spoken to me as a boy while I was in Mama, and as he approached the box that contained the question, "Name of Child," he wrote with a quivering hand and in his best English cursive, Nidal. Strife, struggle. It was not my grandfather's name, and Baba, whose name is Wahid and who was known during his childhood as Saeed, was the only son of the family, so the onus of renaming a son after my grandfather fell squarely upon his shoulders. It was an onus he brushed off his then solid shoulders unceremoniously, like a piece of lint or a flake of dandruff. These are analogies my grandfather would, the next day, angrily pen in a letter sent from Janine to Boston. When he'd filled out the entire form, Baba regally relayed it to the nurse, who he remembers was called Rhonda. Then Baba, in flip-flops, turned around and raced up the white-tiled hallway, bypassed the elevator, ran up the 3 floors to the maternity ward, and burst into the birthing room. "How is my queen?" said Baba, caressing my mother's face. "She's lovely," Mama said, thinking he meant me, "and 8 whole pounds, the buffalo. No wonder my back was so—" Baba's brow furrowed, and Mama couldn't finish her complaint because, eager to correct his mistake, Baba was already out the door and running down the white-tiled hallway, past new mothers and their red-faced babies, past hideous robes and uncalled-for patterns, bypassing the elevator and sliding down the banister of the staircase. He raced on, screaming for Rhonda. "Where is Rhonda? Help me, Rhonda!" An outcry that provided the staff with 3 weeks' worth of laughter. Rhonda emerged with the birth certificate in hand, and Baba, who is not usually known for laziness, grabbed a pen and added, at the end of my name, a heavy, reflexive, feminizing, possessive, cursive I. Moments later, Mama, who had just been informed of my nom de guerre, got out of bed and walked us to the elevator, the entire time ignoring my Baba, who was screaming, "Nidali is a beautiful name, so unique. Come on, Ruse, don't be rash. You mustn't be walking. You need to rest." Mama must not have fought long, or who knows, maybe she went to the nurse's station and talked to Rhonda, and maybe Rhonda told her that the birth certificate was already sent out, that Mama would have to go to the office of the City of Boston clerk and see the Registrar of Vital Statistics, where they kept the birth and death certificates, and maybe Mama, who is the most superstitious of all humans, even more than Baba, and to that she'll attest, shuddered at the thought of taking me, a newborn, through the heat and the Boston traffic to a place where, she must have imagined, people went to fill out death certificates, and she must have further imagined that going on such a trip, to such a place, would surely bring about my death, because I still have my name. Whenever I imagined Baba running out just after my birth and sliding through the hallways like a movie star, I knew he must have embellished. Baba liked to do that. Tell stories that were impossible, but true all at once, especially if those stories made him look like a rock star. This is because he used to be a writer, and was now an architect. Our little apartment was filled with blueprints and plastic models of houses instead of notebooks and poetry, a reality that filled him with great sadness. So Baba put that sadness into these stories. Mama liked to expose him when he told such stories. She was his paparazzo, his story cop. This was because she was the true rock star, a musician who no longer played music. Our house was filled with Baba's blueprints and plastic models of houses, and with my schoolwork and toys and dolls and 100 half pairs of socks, instead of a piano. A reality that filled her with great sadness. I knew from the beginning that home meant embellishing, and that's why I loved school. Teachers were there. they taught us facts based on reality. Okay, so with the passage done, let's move on to the questions. 1. The point of view from which the passage is told is best described as that of A. First-person narrator who recreates a story about her parents, birth of their first child, events which happened before the narrator was born. So the narrator is Nidali, who is retelling the tale of her birth. So the events were certainly not before she was born; they were immediately following. So that answer isn't quite right. B. A first-person narrator who offers insight into characters' thoughts and relates actions mainly from a time she was too young to remember. So that sounds roughly right. It's certainly first-person narration. All the eyes immediately at the beginning indicate that it's from a first-person perspective, she certainly was following her birth. She certainly was too young to remember. So that seems to be the right answer, but we can continue to check the choices. An omniscient third-person narrator who relates the thoughts and actions of several characters. It's not omniscient third person because, again, it's from the perspective of Nidali, who's certainly not omniscient and is relating her own experiences. So it's not third person. A limited third person narrator who relates events most closely from the perspective of Nidali. So again, it is from the perspective of Nidali, but Nidali is actually telling the story. So it's not third person. It is, so in this case, the answer would be B. Okay. Number 2. The narrator mentions a piece of lint and a flake of dandruff, primarily to F. Imply that the narrator's grandfather didn't value family traditions. So we can actually, let's go back to where they mentioned that. So go back to the sentence starting on line 19. It was an onus he brushed off his then solid shoulders unceremoniously, like a piece of lint or a flake of dandruff. Okay, so the onus he's talking about is the responsibility to name his own son after his own father, as you can see in the previous paragraph. Nidal was not my grandfather's name. So that was the responsibility that he was shirking in naming it, and he was brushing it off like a piece of lint or a flake of dandruff. So the reason the narrator mentions it is primarily to F. imply that the narrator's grandfather didn't value family traditions. Yes, that is a reason that it was mentioned. Let's see if some of the other answer choices are better. G. Provide examples of movements Baba made while filling out the birth certificate. No, definitely not. This is figurative language that's being used. These are not actual movements that he's conducting. This is, especially with the use of the word like, we understand this to be a simile, and it's figurative language. It's not literal movements. So G is not right. H. Emphasize the importance of naming the baby after the baby's grandfather. So this specific language is emphasizing how he's dismissing that importance, and certainly not emphasizing the importance of that, the use of the language of the lint or flake of dandruff. J. Illustrate the casual way in which the narrator's father ignored a tradition. Okay. So this actually is an even better answer choice than F, because it's a simile. So it's an illustration. It's drawing a comparison between the reality and an illustration in the simile. So actually J would be a better answer than F, because even though it was implying that the narrator's grandfather didn't value family traditions, J more closely described what the actual choice of language was used for, for the purposes of illustration, and especially the term casual way, like a piece of lint and a flake of dandruff, just brushing it aside. Okay, number 3. Based on the passage, Mama's reaction to learning the name Baba gave the baby can best be described as A. Disapproval followed by resignation, B. Annoyance followed by amusement, C. Embarrassment followed by outrage, D. Shock followed by resentment. Okay, so she learned of the name Baba gave the baby. That was my queen. Not in this paragraph. Merged with the birth certificate in hand. Okay. Moments later, Mama, who had just been informed of my nom de guerre. That's French for name of war. It's not really important if you don't know that. Nidali, meaning, I forget what they said it meant. Strife or struggle. So, name of war, it's kind of an aggressive name that she was upset about. So, who had just been informed of my nom de guerre, got out of bed and walked us to the elevator, the entire time ignoring my baba, who was screaming, Nidali is a beautiful name, so unique. Come on, Ruse, don't be so rash. You mustn't be walking. You need to rest. So she is upset that he named her this harsh name that has this sort of warlike characteristic, because he originally thought, partially because he originally thought she was going to be a boy. And then in the next paragraph, Mama must not have fought long, or who knows, maybe she went to the nurse's station and talked to Rhonda, and maybe Rhonda told her that the birth certificate was already sent out. Okay, so she is angry at Baba for naming her daughter this warlike name, but she quickly accepts this. Okay, so go back to the question. Best be described as A, disapproval followed by resignation. That is pretty close to what we said. The anger followed by quickly accepting it. Let's see if the other answer choices are better. B, annoyance followed by amusement. Certainly, nowhere in the passage was it stated that she was amused, so that wouldn't be right. C, embarrassment followed by outrage. So it was certainly not that sequence was followed. It was, and nowhere was it conveyed that she was embarrassed really directly. So that answer choice is not right either. D, shock followed by resentment. That is close to what happened, but it wasn't really stated that she was shocked by the news, just that it was only conveyed in the passage that, again, she was ignoring Baba and ignoring his pleas for her to calm down, essentially. So actually, the best answer choice in this case would be answer choice A. Okay, number 4. The sequence of actions described in the 7th paragraph, lines 54 through 68, can best be characterized as, okay, let's go and read that. 54 through 68. Mama must not have fought long, or who knows, maybe she went to the nurse's station and talked to Rhonda, and maybe Rhonda told her that the birth certificate was already sent out, that Mama would have to go to the office of the City of Boston clerk and see the Registrar of Vital Statistics where they kept the birth and death certificates. So, speed reading through this paragraph. The summary of this paragraph is sort of Nidali sort of imagining a scenario in which Mama would have not gone to the Boston registrar in order to change the birth certificate. And she gives at the end the reason, because I still have my name. So we can sort of draw from this. So that's kind of the summary of the paragraph. So let's see. Sequence of actions described in the 7th paragraph can best be characterized as Baba's exaggerated account of Mama's trip to the office of the City of Boston clerk. It's not that, because it's nowhere in that paragraph can you see Baba telling anyone anything, essentially. It's not an account by Baba. Okay. G, a scenario the narrator imagines could have happened. Yes, that's fairly accurate. You see the repeated use of the word maybe throughout this paragraph. Maybe Mama must have further imagined. Maybe Mama throughout there. Okay, so that's a possible answer. Okay. H, the story of how Nidali got her name from Mama's point of view. So that sort of could be thought of as the right answer, but actually the paragraph, it's all still from Nidali's perspective. All of these retellings are still all from Nidali's perspective, so it's not actually from Mama's perspective or point of view. So that's not quite accurate to say. Okay, and J, a memory that the narrator shares to reveal more about her personality. Okay, so it's not a memory because of all the subjunctives. So she's saying might have, must have. I don't know quite why or how this happened, but she must have been frightened by the thought of all the death certificates. So actually, the most accurate answer in this case is G. Even though that's a fairly vague answer, it is the only one that accurately describes the sequence of actions in the 7th paragraph. Okay, number 5. The narrator concludes that Mama didn't go to the office of the City of Boston clerk based on the fact that A. Baba believed it would be unlucky to change a baby's name at that point. I don't remember him ever saying that. You could, in the test you could go back and check, but generally, if you've read through it reasonably thoroughly and you have no recollection of that, that's not going to be true. B. Going there would have required taking the baby out in a severe winter storm. Was that mentioned at all? Through the heat and the Boston traffic, nowhere is a winter storm mentioned. So that's not quite right either. Okay. C. Mama had a tendency to change her mind quickly. That wasn't really ever said. It was mostly just because of Mama being fearful. So concludes that Mama didn't go to the office of the City of Boston clerk based on the fact that. Okay, and D, the narrator still has the name Nidali. So actually, in this case, yes, and we see the keyword conclude. Mama didn't go to the office based on the fact that, and actually, in this whole paragraph describing why she didn't go to the City of the Boston clerk, it concludes with the clause, because I still have my name. Okay, so actually D would be the correct answer there. All right, number 6. In line 78, the phrase "these stories" most nearly refers to. All right, we'll go down to there. Line 78. So Baba put that sadness into these stories. Okay, so we can go read through that paragraph again. Whenever I imagined Baba running around just after my birth and sliding through the hallways like a movie star, I knew he must have embellished. Baba liked to do that. Tell stories that were impossible but true all at once. So the stories that he's telling, the stories that these are referring to, are sort of him doing heroic deeds, him running through the hallways like a movie star. These are the sorts of stories that he's telling. Most nearly refers to F, the conflicting stories about the origins of Nidali's name. So that's one of the stories that he's telling, but conflicting stories implies that there are multiple narrators, and it's actually all just the stories told by Baba. So that's not quite right. G, Baba's notebooks and poetry. No, that's not even close to right. It's not referring to his notebooks and poetry, even though if you hadn't read the paragraph, you could have thought that. So that's why it's important to always go back and go back exactly where they say the line, and then often it's helpful to go back and speed read the entire paragraph to refresh, just so you clearly understand the context and aren't just guessing based on the overall story. H, the embellished tales Baba liked to tell. Okay, that's pretty close to what we said. So those are the tales of being a superhero. And if you go back down, actually, whenever I imagined, I knew he must have embellished. Baba liked to do that, tell stories that were impossible but true all at once. So actually, they even used the word embellish to describe the stories, or to describe how he was telling the stories. So that actually is probably fairly likely to be right, especially in that context. Okay, and then J, the narrator's accounts of her family's time in Boston. No, it's Baba's stories that he's telling. So in this case, the most accurate answer would be H. Number 7. According to the passage, which of the following emotions do Baba and Mama share regarding their professional lives? Pride, anxiety, sadness, contentment. And often it can be helpful to make an effort, especially when you're reading these more narrative stories in these tests, to really try to sympathize with the characters and really try to feel what they're feeling, because that's what sticks most in your memory. And so otherwise, you're going to have to go back and look through, and you can try looking for all these emotions back through. But if you remember, Baba was an architect previously, and then, or is now an architect, was a writer, is now an architect, and he missed being a writer, and is now sad that he's an architect. So certainly Baba feels sad, noticing that there. And then if we scroll through, we see, so Baba put that sadness into these stories. Is that the sadness that our little apartment was filled with blueprints and plastic models of houses and set of notebooks and poetry, a reality that filled him with great sadness. So he's sad now that his current career has taken him away from what he loves. So he does feel sadness about his career. And Mama, this is the paragraph about Mama. She's the story cop. She was the musician. Our house was filled, and then it's sort of a parallel structure with the previous paragraph about the house being filled with relics of their past life, Baba's blueprints and plastic models of houses, and my schoolwork and toys and dolls, and 100 half pairs of socks instead of a piano. So their current house is littered with things that are separate from what they want. Their current lives, they're not satisfied with their current lives. They're sad and dissatisfied with their current lives. So certainly the professional lives, they share a certain sadness, and none of the other ones were really ever mentioned throughout the story at all. So if you can kind of focus on those key character emotions throughout the story, that can be really helpful. Number 8. Of the following characters, which one does the narrator describe as the most superstitious? F. Mama, G. Baba, H. Nidali, J. Rhonda. So if we just kind of scroll, generally as the questions go further on, it'll be about things that are later in the passage, which makes sense. So that makes scrolling through a little bit easier. You don't have to look through quite as much. So going up here, moments later, Italy is a beautiful name. Okay, maybe Mama, who's the most superstitious of all humans, even more than Baba, and to that she'll attest. So Mama is the most superstitious, and you just kind of have to go through and see where that's mentioned. I don't believe it was mentioned anywhere else, so that would just be kind of a keyword. Find that phrase as quickly as possible. And 9. The narrator most strongly suggests that Mama does which of the following when Baba tells stories? Yawns and rolls her eyes in mock boredom. That was never really said. Goes about her business and ignores him. Yes. So especially, well, so when he initially, when she was angry concerning Nidali's name, she was certainly ignoring him. This is asking when he tells stories. So the only time it mentions him telling stories is down near the end. Tell stories. No mention of Mama in this paragraph from line 69 to 78. send us into the stories. Mama liked to expose him when he told such stories. She was his paparazzo, his story cop. Okay, so that gives a clear response to what Mama's response is to his stories. She is his story cop. So let's see if any of the answer choices fit that. Okay. Yawns and rolls her eyes in mock boredom. Again, no. Goes about her business and ignores him. Actually, that doesn't really fit that. Chimes in with exaggerations and white lies. So that doesn't really fit in with that. D, corrects him about the accuracy of details, would most closely fit the idea of being a story cop, of policing him on his story, on the details of his stories. Okay, and finally number 10 for this story. 10. In the passage, the narrator makes which of the following distinctions? Home is a place of embellished stories, whereas school is a place of facts and reality. And actually, if we look, that's literally the second to last sentence. I knew from the last two sentences, I knew from the beginning that home meant embellishing, and that's why I love school. Teachers were there, they taught us facts based on reality. So a little bit of, yeah, there. So that does fit. It does make that distinction. So let's see if any of the others fit better. G, Mama is a true rock star, whereas Baba is an amateur musician. So if you remember, Baba was not actually a musician, he was the architect. And keeping that kind of character roles clear in your head, learning them quickly, keeping them clear in your head can be really important for these type of narrative stories. So that G is not accurate. H, being an architect made Baba happy, whereas being a writer made him miserable. So it's actually the other way around. Being an architect made him miserable, or makes him miserable, and being a writer was fun for him. And J, writing requires great imagination, whereas playing music requires great skill. That was never really mentioned. If you don't really remember it as a main point, it's probably wasn't mentioned in the story at all. This I don't recall being mentioned at all. So that distinction was not made. So F in this case is the correct answer.